We love to talk schedule here, and we did our schedule release semi-specials the other day, and I'm going to have a lot more on that. And we will have in the coming days and coming weeks full grand season previews for several programs, a lot of the most notable programs. And in those, I will do my own strength of schedule analysis. And the way that I like to do it is I like to give every team, every game on your schedule, its own individual difficulty rating or toughness rating. A lot of factors go into that, obviously. But having said that, just as much as everyone's going to focus on when Alabama and LSU play, or when does Georgia, Florida happen, I like to talk about landmine games too. And these are the games, let me tell you what it is and what it isn't. Always love to set the tone with this. What this is these are going to be games where there'll be a decided favorite, touchdown or more, let's call it, but they're losable games. And they're the kind of games where no one's going to predict it to happen. But if it does happen, people won't be totally shocked, if the upset were to happen. So picked out a few games here. Follow the logic. These are not picks. These are not predictions. These are just sort of, I don't have a red Sharpie in my hand, but if I had a red Sharpie, we're just circling these games with a red Sharpie. It's just kind of look out as if you were walking around actual landmines. Look out. We don't have to go far to start. Let's go to week 1. Florida at Ole Miss. Could have taken the Kentucky-Auburn game here, but I think you feel a lot safer if you're Auburn at least knowing what you're going to get from Kentucky. No one knows what they're getting from Ole Miss. No one knows. And here's kind of the fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown is you got a guy who is probably willing to throw anything against a wall in week 1 in Lane Kiffin, a guy who knows offensive football in Lane Kiffin, and he's also got talent at the quarterback spot in Plumlee. Like, it's not a situation where he's walking in there and he's looking around at the roster and saying, well, this is a 3-year minimum rebuild. Maybe in some places it is, but quarterback, they're good enough at quarterback. I was talking about Bo Nix a second ago being off the radar. Well, Plumlee's pretty off the radar too nationally. I think Lane Kiffin's really excited with what he has there. And he's got options, by the way, at quarterback. Got options. Do you know what you're seeing? You have no clue, probably, if you're Florida. Now, you feel comfortable you got a roster advantage there, but none of the Florida fans that I've spoken to are looking at week 1 as anything more than a nice test. You're not worried because there won't be crowd there, so the true road factor's out the window. Most Florida fans I talk to, they are looking at week 3 and week 4, and that's when they play A&M and LSU. And outside of that, we'll get some good, solid tune-ups. There's no gimmies in the SEC, but this is one that we all expect to win. Hey, I expect you to win it too if I had to pick it right now, but just these are landmine games for a reason. How about week 3? Tennessee at Georgia. When the SEC's schedule was released, everyone knew and still knows that Tennessee's got a really tough slate. But I think that the Georgia and Alabama games were placed about as advantageously as Jeremy Pruitt could have ever hoped for. Here's what I mean. Let's start with this one, for example. Tennessee at Georgia. There's this string early in the year. If you look at Georgia's schedule, there's a string early in the year where it's not easy. The back half of their schedule is very manageable. After the Florida game, it's very manageable. But the early portion, you got a lot of moving chairs offensively. You got a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, whoever it is. And so a lot of things may be still unsettled. And there's going to be this string where Georgia plays Auburn and Kevin Steele, really good defensive coordinator. And then they play this game I'm talking about. They play Jeremy Pruitt and Tennessee. And that's the week before they go to Alabama and play Nick Saban and the Tide. And so if you believe in look-ahead spots, this is kind of a quasi-look-ahead spot that Tennessee catches Georgia in. And the reason really that I circle this is not because I think Georgia will overlook Tennessee. That's probably not happening. But I do believe that there is a perception and reality barrier here, a gap between the two when it comes to the perception of rosters this year. Tennessee does not have a roster equal to Georgia. That much is true. But what I am telling you is there's a perception still that there is a very, very wide gap between Georgia's roster and a roster like Tennessee. And I'm not knocking Georgia's roster at all. They live up to all the expectations and all the marquee and whatnot that you give them. Tennessee's roster is better than people think it is. So what I'm saying is this is not some game where if I were to tell you, hey, Georgia's going to show up and play at a C plus, B minus level, you'd say, oh, it's okay. They'll still out roster them. They may beat them, but it's not going to be because they just take a roster and lean on Tennessee. You could do that 2 years ago. You could do it last year, and you'll still have an advantage over them this year, but it's not so wide that you can afford to sleepwalk your way through this thing and just sort of survive and advance. I don't think that's the way Tennessee is going to be this year for several noteworthy opponents, including Georgia. Now, I'm going to stick with Georgia here, and they play Tennessee. We just talked about that. Then they go to Alabama. And then the week after that is their second consecutive road game against Kentucky. I'm going to do – Kentucky will have their own feature that we're going to do coming up. Tennessee has a tough schedule, and I talked about their biggest games being in manageable spots, pales in comparison to Kentucky. Like everyone who covers the SEC, they're trying to make Kentucky a dark horse, and they're trying to make Kentucky the sleeper pick, and that's great. If I were trying to do that in this blue shirt I'm wearing, if you're watching on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, subscribe, by the way, I just look at the schedule. So I'm not going to go down that road right now, but Kentucky's schedule, they play a lot of tough opponents. It's fascinating where all those tough opponents lie, if you believe in certain scheduling dynamics and factors. But let's go to week 5. So Georgia's at Kentucky. They just played at Alabama. That's Georgia's Super Bowl, essentially. Now they go back out on the road, and they face Kentucky. So that concludes a string. This game will conclude a string for Georgia, by far their toughest of the year, where they have gone Auburn, Tennessee, at Alabama. That's 3 high emotional, highly physical games back to back to back, and then they go on the road to play Kentucky. Now, this is a game where Georgia can out-roster someone. The thing you worry about with Kentucky is not if you bring it. You can play at your B-minus level as long as you're relatively mistake-free. You'll be fine if you're Georgia because you're that good. What I worry about is if this were the 2020 version of the 2019 Carolina game, where you turn it over 4 times, you're -4 in the turnover battle, and just you don't have your focus, you don't have your fastball, which would be understandable coming off that 3-game stretch. What's really dangerous about that with a team like Kentucky is this is obviously their Super Bowl, and they possess the pretty unique ability to shave possessions off a game. This team right here possesses the ability and a total willingness to play ugly, and they can shorten the game on you, and they can lean on you a little bit, especially if you're giving the ball to them, in addition to the normal amount of possessions that they would have. That's the kind of game that you could be favored by 3 touchdowns in, and yet someone texts you and it's saying, hey, you watching this Georgia game? It's like 17-16, early fourth quarter. I don't know what's happening, but you might want to turn over here. And the last one that I wanted to get to, another Ole Miss game. Ole Miss at Auburn, or no, Ole Miss at Texas A&M, week 9. Think this one through. This is a little ways out there. These other games were kind of earlier in the year. If we're in week 9, Ole Miss going to College Station, you kind of picture it with me. I'm a believer that Texas A&M is still going to be alive in the Western Division race and in the college football playoff race at that point. I'm a believer in that. So think it through with me. A&M is coming off a game at Tennessee. Let's say they've won that game, so they survive in advance, they're still in contention, and they got LSU coming up next week. And in the middle of that trip to Tennessee, and they got LSU coming in next week, we're going to play Kentucky. Or we're going to play Ole Miss. Yeah, Kentucky would be dangerous too. We're going to play Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss, if we're thinking this through, Ole Miss probably not a great record at this point. Ole Miss has probably taken their lumps, but see, here's the problem. This game's in week 9. It's not in week 1 or week 2. Week 1 or week 2, it may turn out that they didn't have their stuff together, which is understandable, but Lane Kiffin and that team collectively, they had the light bulb moment between weeks 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and week 9 when we're playing them, if we're Texas A&M. Could be full ambush mode is what I'm telling you. That could be Ole Miss's Super Bowl game. If you're looking for one of those program definers and the game you can package up and take out on the recruiting trail and sell to kids for a vision of the future, that'd be it. So those are some landmine games to look at in the SEC. We can do those for other conferences too. If you guys are interested, let me know in the comment section.